In this training, we're going to break down the workflow of an automation that you build inside of SmartSuite. So if that's of interest, stick around and let's get into it. Alright, let's start by just hopping on into my screen and rolling up our sleeves because we have a lot to discuss in this training. We're going to be looking at a workflow that builds inside of an automation. And what I'm going to be highlighting for you is the building blocks of automation. Effectively, that we have a trigger that will initiate our automation, and then we can have multiple action steps following that trigger that will actually perform the automation itself. So let's take a quick look at our setup first, and then we'll work on building that automation and going step by step. Now here I am inside of my operations solution, and I have two different apps. I have my projects app, where I have some projects listed out and some tasks, and I have a little checkbox here. And then I have my tasks app, and on my tasks app I have some tasks already created. These tasks have numbers of their own. They're also linked back to a particular project and also assigned to someone, and they have a status of backlog. So let's imagine that here I am inside of my projects app, and I just want to be able to push a checkbox here. This is a great way to initiate the automation to then create the tasks. And I want to create 3 different tasks when I check that box and link them back to this particular project. I also want those tasks back in the Tasks app. I want them to be assigned to me, let's say. Then at the end of all of this, I want to send myself a notification. I can do that in a number of different places, but in this particular example, I'm going to choose to send that notification via Slack, a third-party tool that SmartSuite integrates nicely with. So that's the outline of this automation. Let's break it down step by step, how we can build this to help better understand the workflow of an automation. Now, as I mentioned, the first thing I want to see is that box getting checked. This is a yes/no field type inside of SmartSuite. So when it gets checked like this, that will be the trigger that initiates the automation. So now that I've checked that box, let's click up here and get access to the automations for this solution. So I can access automations here, and the first thing I'm asked to determine is the trigger. The trigger of an automation is what initiates it. You can think of an automation as lying dormant, waiting for something to happen, and the trigger is the thing it's waiting for. So here I am going to build a particular condition. I'm looking for a record inside of my projects app, and I want it to meet a specific condition. I'm looking for that checkbox. We called it create tasks. So when create tasks is equal to yes, because remember this is a yes/no field. So when it's checked, that is what starts the automation. Now I can add additional conditions here. So I might also say that I also want the tasks link to be empty. So meaning that they don't already have tasks created for them. So tasks is empty. So you'll notice here when I'm establishing my trigger that I'm saying I'm watching a particular field. That's the leftmost piece. Then I get to do my logical operator here. So what do I want that field to look like? Is equal to, is empty, is not equal to. And then optionally there's a third column depending on what operator we chose in the second column. And this is where we can determine what we want it to be equivalent to or what we want it to match. So here I have my particular conditions. I've now established my trigger, and I can move on to what I want the actions to be in this automation. So when the box is checked, what happens? Well, I'm going to create 3 tasks. The first one is going to be creating a record. I want to create this record not in my projects app, but in my tasks app. So I make that selection here. Now, what do I want to add for the different fields? The record's going to come into existence, but what fields do I want to update? Well, number 1, I have a number field inside of this, and this is going to be the first task. So I'm going to add a number here, the number 1. You also notice that I can bring in dynamic data as well inside of an automation. So I can access information that existed previously in previous steps in my automation. In this case, I can access the number from the trigger. So that's not what I want. I want to actually hard code a number here and just drop in a 1. So you can also type data in as well. And that's called static data when we just type in data as opposed to accessing a previous step of the automation. Both are available to you. You can do both in tandem as well. So this is one field I want to have filled out. I want the number of the task, but I also want to make sure that I'm assigning this to myself, right? So how do I do that? Well, here, by default, we're looking at information that came from the trigger. So I mentioned earlier that we can access dynamic data in SmartSuite. We can. That's information that came from the trigger dynamically. Every time this occurs, the trigger will be different. But you notice that I could go back, as I just did, and see more information. I can access teams inside of SmartSuite. I can access specific members as well. So in this case, I want to assign it to myself. So let me just drill into the members here and find myself from the list. So there we are. I've created a new task now in this particular record. So this record creates a task with the number of the task, and it's assigned to me. Now, I also mentioned that I want the status to start off in backlog, but I don't have to actually assign this inside the automation because of the fact that status field has a default setting. That default setting is backlog. So as soon as the record comes into existence, it will automatically have that proper status assigned. Now, the other piece that I want to add here is linking this back to the project. The task must be connected to the project that initiated the automation. So we're going to add one more field, and we're going to bring in the link to projects here. And this is where we're going to benefit from having access to information in the trigger. So the field from the trigger that we're looking for is going to be the record itself. What is this record? Well, we can scroll down and take a look at our options. And the best one before us here is actually the name of the record that initiated the automation. So I believe that was called title in that particular case. So we should find it right here at the very bottom. And we're good to go. Now let's just quickly stop right here. We've done a lot so far. I'm creating one record with 3 different fields being filled out, and don't forget that status field is also going to be assigned to backlog. So let's just pause and add this automation. Now it's not currently switched on, so when we go to add the automation, it's going to ask if we want to turn it on, so we can say yes, we do. We'll turn it on. Give SmartSuite just a moment to do its thing. And I would recommend coming in and, of course, renaming your automations as well to stay more organized. New automation doesn't tell us much, so use a naming convention that makes sense for you. But for now, I'm pretty happy with this automation. It's creating my first task. So let's test it out. I'm going to uncheck the box, wait for just a moment, and then check the box again to make sure that the automation does what it's supposed to do. In the background, that should be creating a new task inside of my tasks application, which you see just was created here, and that task was given the number 1, assigned to me, backlog is the status, and most importantly, properly linked back to my project that initiated the automation. So we're pretty good here on the first part. Now, what I want to point out is that we can now go back to that automation and continue building. Now we've tested that first piece, making sure that it works, so we can add additional actions as well. I want to create a record again because I want to create 3 tasks. So here I say create another record and add a field again. Bring in that assigned to. Go back to where I was before and find the member. And this particular one is going to have a different number. So when I'm adding the number, this is 2. Static data, I'm just entering that in. And lastly, the link that we have to our projects right here. I'll bring in the title of this project and we're good to go again. So there we have it. I've got my 3 elements for my second task and I can move on. You can also duplicate an action. So this would be the easier way to do this. If I know I want to take the same action multiple times, well, let's duplicate it and create a third one and just come in to that third element and add any differences or make any changes that we need to. So in this case, I just need to update the number of this task to 3. So we're good there, except for we don't have the final piece of the automation, which is going to be sending a message via Slack. So in our case, we're going to go ahead and select Slack from the drop down here in Actions. I already have integrated Slack here, but if you haven't integrated your Slack, you can first integrate it here when you first make this selection. If you need to add new credentials, you can do so right here, or I can just go ahead and make a selection of a credential that has already been added here. So in this case, I would be sending a message to myself, so I can select the channel. I want to send it directly to me, so I'll just look myself up in this Slack workspace. There I am, and I can craft the message. I can say new tasks added for project, and I can bring in the project name. This is where I was mentioning that we have the ability to include both static and dynamic data in the same automation step. So here I have some static data. It's always going to say new tasks added for project, but I want to bring in the project name, and so I can access the name of the project by finding it in the title here and including it in the message. So this every time is going to be slightly different. The beginning part will be the same, and the title for whatever project triggered the automation will always be different, and so there we are. Once you're happy with the changes you made, be sure to save your automation, and it'll again take just a moment to get set up. And from here, we can click back and test the automation one more time from the projects table. Remember, the thing that initiates our automation is that we don't have a task and we check the box. So we check the box, we sit back, we wait, and the automation will start working in the background. Now that these conditions have been met, we see the first task was created, and pretty quickly we're going to see second and third tasks added as well. And shortly, I'll receive a message in my Slack. So there's a lot of opportunity here inside of automations in Smart Suite. If you haven't experienced automations before in a no-code tool, definitely take some time to explore this further because it will change everything for you. We went really fast in this video and covered a lot, so feel free to go back and re-watch if you have any questions, and I'll see you in the next training. If you have any questions about what we covered in this training, please ask them below in the comments section of this video. And until then, we'll see you in the next training.